This tutorial is for 6th grade, Module 4, Lesson 8. In this lesson, we're going to simplify expressions that use the distributive property. The first question says, Luca wants to make sure he always has a clean soccer uniform for games, so he wants to buy 3 complete uniforms. He's not sure about the cost of the jersey, but he knows the shorts cost $30. You can see we have pictures of the 3 jerseys, and we're using the variable X as the unknown cost of the jersey, and then $30 for the shorts. And we have this repeated 3 times because he's going to buy 3 complete uniforms. We can use the distributive property to show this. So the 3 outside of the parentheses represents the 3 complete outfits. So we know that each outfit has an unknown for the cost of the jersey and then $30 for the shorts. So this is how we would write the expression using the distributive property. We need 3 copies of x plus 30. We can then simplify this expression as 3x plus 90. 3x represents the cost of 3 jerseys, and then 90 represents the cost of 3 shorts for the uniform. Let's look at another example. Hannah is ordering complete albums from her favorite music streaming website. She is not sure about the cost of each album, but she has a code for $2 off each album, and she plans to order 4. So you can see the pictures represent the 4 albums. She's not sure of the cost, so that's our variable or our unknown. And she has a code that allows her to get $2 off of each album. So for each picture, we have the same thing. We have the original price minus $2. So for the distributive property, we would have 4 copies of X, the cost of the album, minus the $2 from her code. To simplify this expression, we would say in all, she would pay 4 times the cost of an album, and then she would subtract $8 because she is going to take $2 off for each album. So that's the simplified version of the distributive property of 4 times x minus 2. Let's look at how we can use the distributive property when looking at pictures. The first picture is showing us 2x plus 3. So I have 2 copies of x and I have 3 ones. Below that, we've repeated that picture 3 times. And that's what the distributive property is telling us. We've taken 3 copies of 2x plus 3. To simplify this, we would show how many x's we have in all and how many numbers we have. Since we have 3 copies of 2x, that now gives us 6x. And since we had 3 copies of the 3 ones, we now have 9 ones altogether. So that's the simplified version of that picture. Here's another example. This time the original picture shows us 3x and 2 minus 1s, which would be minus 2 altogether. We've taken that same picture and we've copied it over twice. So the 2 goes on the outside of the parentheses because we need 2 copies of 3x minus 2. When we simplify the expression, we now show that we have 6x because we took 2 copies of the 3x, and now we're subtracting 4 because we took 2 copies of the minus 2. So this is the simplified expression for this picture. Now let's look at the distributive property using just numbers. The first expression has a 4 on the outside of the parentheses. That means I need 4 copies of everything inside the parentheses. And I'll write that in words and numbers here. So this means I need 4 copies of x plus 1. To simplify that, that means altogether I would have 4 x's, and then 4 copies of the 1 would give me a 4. If I look at the next problem, now I have a 3 on the outside of the parentheses, which means I need 3 copies of everything on the inside. So I need 3 copies of 2x minus 7. Well, if I have 3 copies of 2x, that would give me 6x, and I'm going to subtract 3 copies of 7, which would be 21. So 6x minus 21 is the simplified version. In problem C, I need 2 copies of negative 4x plus 1. So I'll write that in words. 2 copies of negative 4x plus 1. Well, 2 copies of negative 4x would be negative 8x, and 2 copies of 1 would be 2. The last problem, I need 2 copies of 8x, so we'll write that in words. 2 copies of 8x. Well, if I have 2 copies of 8x, that just means that now I have 16x. So these are the simplified versions of the distributive property using those variables. And the last section is just practicing simplifying the expressions. I'll just do a couple of them here. The first one has a 4 outside of the parentheses. That means I need 4 copies of everything inside the parentheses. Well, 4 copies of x would be 4x. And I'm going to add to that 4 copies of 7. 4 copies of 7 would be 28. And let's go down to problem E. Here I have 8 copies of x minus 7. So 8 copies of x would be 8x, and 8 copies of minus 7 would be minus 56, because 8 times 7 is 56. So those are just some examples of using that distributive property when we have our variables involved.